Good morning and welcome to our safety connection on farming and the MLITSD agriculture campaign. This is a joint safety connection with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services and the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. My name's Sean McCormick and I'll be your host for the day. Before we get going, we do have a MLITSD demographics survey that is optional, but we do ask that everyone complete. There is a link on the screen that you can click on or scan the QR code if you'd rather use your phone. The demographic surveys to better understand who's participating in our safety connections and to ensure we're providing accessible training for all people in Ontario. We are collecting this information on behalf of our funder, the MLITSD. Your responses will be kept secure and anonymous, and the ministry will not receive any of your personal information. We'll simply analyze the survey results in aggregate form prior to sending it to the ministry. To complete it, please click the link on the screen, or if it could be entered into the chat, that would make things a little bit easier for some. And you will need to enter the following function number. On the screen, 232696. I'll just copy and paste that back into the chat again, so it's at the bottom of your message. While I give everyone a moment to do that, we will just go through a little bit of the background information on how to use Teams. We do recommend that you're using your computer audio. Phone conference is available. Your microphone and camera will remain muted and off throughout the presentation, though. We do have the ability to have reactions. So that is the little smile react button at the top of the screen. And you can use that to give thumbs up, laugh, applause, etc. We will not be using any polls during the safety connection, so you don't need to worry about that. But we will be using the chat on the right-hand side of the screen, which I know many people were using to share where they're calling in from. For a few accessibility features, if you do click on the three dots at the top right of the screen, you can go to language and speech and enable show live captions. I will say this is completely AI generated, so it might not be fully accurate at all times. It does its best, but there might be some weird messages that come across. And finally, if you do want to see this in full screen, you can click on view, then select full screen. Personally, I find that this view that we're in now works pretty well, but it is an option that is available. Okay, what's the goal of today's webinar? It's pretty simple. It's to raise awareness of the MLITSD Farming and Agriculture campaign for 2026 to 2027. We'll get more details on that in a minute. Our agenda, start with a quick introduction, which we're doing right now. Then we'll pass it over to our guests at the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development to give us more information on this campaign. And then we'll pass it back to WSPS, where we'll talk about some tips and best practices and how we can help. And then we'll wrap up with some resources and hopefully a fairly lengthy time to ask questions both to the ministry and to ourselves. So final part, me before I do pass it over, but what type of operation are you joining us from? Please use the chat to let us know. Greenhouse, hatchery and egg farming, lots of greenhouses, orchard, equipment, dealerships. Okay, we are seeing quite a wide range coming. So our two presenters that we will be passing it to, we have Ron Landry, the Industrial Program Senior Management from the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. And we have Kristen Hoffman, Specialized Consultant in Agriculture from WSPS. Okay, I will pass it off to Ron now, who's going to take control.
All right, thank you, Sean. Just give me a minute here, I'll share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see that now. All right, I'm Ron Landry. I'm with the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. I am the Senior Manager of the Industrial Health and Safety Program. And, operationally, we divide it up into industrial, construction, mining, and healthcare. But we all look after inspectors across the province, providing guidance and support to them. And it is inspectors from the industrial program that will be doing the visits to the farming and agriculture as part of this campaign. So the presentation I'm going to be going through is not legal advice, it's just sharing information with you. So the usual government type disclosure. So our vision is an Ontario that is the most attractive place to work in the world because every employee is treated fairly and comes home safely, right? So, everyone has that right to be safe in their workplace, to participate and to report any concerns in that regard. So we set, communicate, and enforce legislation to help make Ontario workplaces fair, safe, and healthy. And through our professionalism, innovation, and collaboration, we earn and maintain the public trust. So, part of my role as senior manager is trying to ensure that as a modern regulator, stakeholders have a certain level of expectation of what their interaction with our inspectors would be. And part of that is sharing information about our campaigns. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our goals. I'm going to talk about the Farming and Ag campaign overview, the timelines of the campaign, some of the key areas that our inspectors will be focused on, though not limited to, but there are always key focus areas when we do these types of campaigns. I'll also share some resources with you. So the 26-27 Farming and Ag campaign, we're going to talk a little bit about what we focus on and why. So we're focused on the most common hazards faced by workers in the farming and agriculture sector. Farming and agriculture is one of the sectors that we tend to get a lot of reports from, a lot of reports of injuries, illnesses, things of that nature. So we're putting a little focus on this area. So they have been identified as having the highest number of reported critical injury events as opposed to a specific hazard. So we're looking at what sectors are giving us the most reports and then going to those sectors and seeing what sort of hazards are specific or unique to that those sectors. So our data from 24 and 25 shows that there were 12 worker fatalities in the sector, 8 of which were a result of being struck by an object or being crushed. And there were also 67 critical injuries during the same time period. So there is evidence to suggest that there is a need for focus in this area. So what we want to do with our campaign is raise awareness to these types of hazards within the sector, sharing information and increasing the comfort level of what to expect in an inspection process, because not everyone, has been in that position of having an inspector attend their workplace. Prior to coming to the ministry, I worked in the automotive manufacturing sector, so I've been on the other side, and I know that it can be uncomfortable, but it doesn't need to be. We're all looking for the same thing at the end of the day, which is workers being healthy and safety conscious and being able to have a long, successful career with the company. And also share some, again, resources that are available to folks. So, of course, our first goal is increasing compliance with the Act and its regulations, preventing workplace injuries and illnesses that may result from unsafe work practices, raising awareness of key health and safety hazards in the farming and ag sector. So I'm going to talk a little bit later on about what we're focused on. Those are the number one types of contraventions that we are aware of. These are good areas to focus on, though not limited to those. And ensuring that workplace parties understand and comply with their legal duties, and also referring employers to WSPS for assistance in meeting legislative requirements. So folks may or may not know this, but inspectors can't actually tell you how to fix the problem. They'll tell you there is a problem, they'll give you a timeline to fix it, probably the circumstance, but they're not allowed to actually tell you how to fix the problem. And if you're not sure, the Health and Safety Associations can actually tell you and support you in reaching compliance. So the campaign runs, we have, the Health and Safety Association supports April 1st through March 31st of 27 in partnership with WSPS, hosting the webinar and providing compliance assistance. And the enforcement activities, again, take place over the same time period, April 1st, 26 through March 31st, 27. And so they are already underway. So I'm going to go a little bit through the campaign itself. So all of our inspectors are trained on biosecurity and biosecurity protocol. And of course, we adhere to any of those protocols when attending. Making sure that if there are biosecurity measures in place, that we are following them and adhering to the workplace requirements. So some of the areas, like I said before, we're focused where the orders have been taking place. So we're not limited to these hazards, but these are the primary focus. So machine guarding, lockout, and tagout, maintenance of equipment, lifting devices, mobile equipment, farming machinery, slip, trip, and fall hazards, workplace layout and design, so pedestrian hazards, safe access in and out of line of sight so that operators can see workers and workers can see operators, and making sure that they're establishing that eye contact so folks know where each other are, and also looking at the transportation of workers. Heat stress, also another concern to consider. Restricted and confined spaces. Part of restricting confined spaces is, it's one thing if workers are required to go into these types of spaces, they have to be trained to be able to do that safely. But even if you don't require your workers to go into those places, they need to be trained to recognize those places so that if they come across it, they know they don't go in there, right? And if there's an issue, they need to notify their supervisors and employers to address whatever that concern is. But they need, at a minimum, to know where they are and that they don't go in those areas. And again, if they're required to go in those areas, that they're trained and equipped properly to do that in a safe manner. And of course, material handling and storage systems. So this is your racking, your shelving, and the equipment that you're using to load those up. So what to expect during an inspection. So the inspector is there to enforce the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulations based on the facts as they find them at the time of the inspection. It's important to note that inspectors enforce the minimum standard as prescribed. So not the best method, though we encourage and support going to the best method. Compliance with the order is to the minimum standard. But again, the Health and Safety Association can assist you in not only achieving compliance, but going above and beyond, which is ideal. But what we enforce is minimum. So the inspector has the right to enter and access all areas of the workplace without, they're not required to make an appointment to do that. They just show up. We don't sneak in the workplace. We don't kick down doors. We explain why we're there, and everyone understands that, and then we move forward with the inspection process. So the inspector will introduce themselves, explain the reason for the visit, and ask to have a worker and management representative accompany them during the inspection if they are available. And the inspector may conduct an administrative review and a physical inspection of the workplace. So a typical inspection starts off with, the paperwork side of things, right? Required postings, if you have any health and safety meetings, any minutes from those meetings, any outstanding concerns, looking at the admin side of things, and then the physical walk around of the workplace itself. So the administrative side is looking at, the key is the internal responsibility system, right? So everyone owns a piece of it. It's not just the worker, it's not just the supervisor, it's not just the employer, it's everyone working together. So everyone has to have active participation. Everyone needs to accept that accidents and illnesses have causes that can be eliminated or greatly reduced. Everyone has to have a clear understanding of their own skill, ability, and limitations, and should have the capacity to carry out their responsibilities in a safe manner. They should be involved in hazard identification and risk assessment, or at least be familiar with the process. And procedures should be available, trained, and communicated. Right? The easiest way to control the process is to have set procedures on how things should be done in a safe manner, ensuring workers are trained in those procedures. And the Joint Health and Safety Committee, if required, has a meeting at least every 3 months, and they're keeping minutes of those meetings and ensuring that issues are addressed in a timely manner, not just carried over from meeting to meeting. You need to be moving to resolve those issues, and the employer needs to be actively supporting the work of the committee. So looking on the administrative requirements, some of the areas that we'll be looking at again is maintaining equipment in good condition, and the specified sections are listed after each of these. Training and orientation provided by the employer, for example, supervisor and worker awareness training. That's free training available online. It's been available for years now, and not just farming and ag. It's one of the main orders we write still to this day, and all folks need to do is go online and go through it. Posting a copy of the Act, preparing at least annually a health and safety policy, compliance with sections 8 and 9 of the Act regarding worker representation in joint health and safety committees. So 8 and 9 are all the rules around that. And compliance related to workplace violence and harassment. So there's a number of requirements available there, and good guidance information available on our website for everything that you should have in place in that regard. So on the enforcement compliance side of things, so there's a link for the supervisor and workers basic occupational health and safety awareness training. Again, it's free, it doesn't take long to do it, but there are still a lot of folks that have not done that. And there's also free resources available on worker health and safety awareness in 4 steps and supervisor health and safety awareness in 5 steps. Again, links available in the presentation. So inspectors will be paying particular attention during the farm and field visits, looking at new and young workers, temporary foreign workers, and temporary help agencies workers. We know that there are particular vulnerabilities involved with these groups, so an area of focus. And also many of these workplaces could be small businesses and or employ vulnerable workers. And we know that, as a ministry that's small businesses, they don't have the same resources as the big corporate entities. So as a result, we have a lot of resources on our website specifically tailored to small business. And I know the Health and Safety Association as well has tailored a lot of resources to small businesses to help you out. We'll also be paying particular attention to new and young workers, and where they may be present and where there may be temporary help agencies. Again, these are, added factors of risk for more vulnerable workers, more insecure workers, that we want to ensure that we have all the proper supports in place for them. So what happens if an inspector finds a contravention of the Act or its regulations? So in other words, something that does not meet the minimum standard, they can issue an order, and the inspector will explain the contravention, may make a referral to health and safety associations. In extreme cases, they can issue a stop work order where you have to stop whatever that particular task is because it's an immediate threat to the workers' health and safety. But regardless of when we attend a workplace, we leave a field visit report that outlines anything that has to be done in orders, and as well as a detailed narrative which explains, in general what was done in the course of the inspection, and may contain additional resources. And there's a link here on what to expect in an inspection as well. There are times when we have compliance commitments where, if something's found to be a contravention, but it's a minor contravention, typically admin contravention, and if the workplace parties are, on side with fixing it immediately, then sometimes it can be done as a compliance commitment, which is not an actual order. It's just everyone agrees to do it, and it's documented in the field visit report. So focus on heat stress, ensuring that workers and supervisors are trained in recognizing the signs of heat stress, having measures and procedures to protect workers from heat stress, and supervision for workers in hot weather environments. So there's a number of links available here to help work on that heat stress policy and program for your workplace. But it's obviously, it can be a very serious threat to worker health and safety, given that our summers are getting more and more humid these days. So it's good to consider having that policy and program in place, and taking into account various things such as, getting acclimatized to the environment as the weather changes, and taking into account not only temperature but also humidity. And a lot of these resources will help you to do that. So in the enforcement compliance, we'll be ensuring that employers, supervisors, and workers are complying with the general duties under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So again, internal responsibility, everyone has specific roles and responsibilities under the Act. So the employers have the duty to ensure that equipment, materials, and protective devices provided to the employer are maintained in good condition. Provide information, instruction, and supervision is provided to workers to provide their health and safety. To acquaint a worker or person in authority over work with any hazard in the work, handling, storage, use, disposal, and transport of any article, device, equipment, or biological, chemical, or physical agent. And of course, 25(2)H, which is taking every precaution reasonable in the circumstance for the protection of a worker. So, 25(2)H is basically the catch-all. Well, we'll write an order to address a hazard that's not otherwise addressed by a specific act or applicable regulation in that circumstance. So that's why 25(2)H is there. It's very broad interpretation and application. So it's to address any hazard to a worker. So supervisor responsibilities to ensure that a worker works in the manner and with the protective devices, measures, and procedures required by the Act and regulation. Ensuring any equipment, protective devices, or clothing required by the employer is used or worn by the worker, and of course used properly. Advise the worker of any potential actual danger in the health and safety of the worker, of which the supervisor is aware, and to take every precaution reasonable in the circumstance for the protection of the worker. So 27(2)C is basically the 25(2)H specific to supervisors. So specific to lifting devices, mobile equipment and cranes, ensuring all equipment has been added to your preventive maintenance program. You could consider creating checklists for pre-use inspection. It's a great way to document your due diligence. Consider providing proper training on all lifting devices and mobile equipment, ensuring operator manuals are kept with machines. So you want to make sure your operators are competent. I always kind of turn it back to, for example, a forklift operator, right? Some people will hire a forklift operator because, they did well in the interview and they've been trained. But some employers will hire that individual, but they won't let them drive their forklifts until they've attended training with their instructor. I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm just saying from a due diligence standpoint, that's a good example of, because you don't know what training they received and to what standard, so you want to make sure they're trained and at your standard before working in your workplace. You want to ensure that your training and maintenance records are available and up to date, and that you're following the manufacturer's safety procedures and recommendations on the use of your equipment. So always refer to the manual. It's a great resource. And now with the internet, if it didn't come with the equipment, you say you bought something used, you can look it up online for the most part and get that information. So looking at manual material handling, so actually, muscling things around, or reviewing the capacity for your workers to handle material, reviewing handling material on ladders. Consider a ladder safety program. If you're using ladders, you should have a safety program in place. Safe lifting and techniques, bending your knees, not your back, things of that nature, and looking at, what you're lifting, how it changes through the day or through the season, and ensuring that you have adequate measures in place to protect your workers' health and safety. And completing a simple risk assessment for musculoskeletal disorder hazards, and perhaps considering in-depth assessments for high-risk jobs. So just making sure that you take into account the changing conditions and ensuring that the workers are not lifting awkwardly or beyond their capacities. Looking at machine guarding, workplace inspections will ensure that they're looking at machine guarding that is adequate, fixed properly, whether or not they're damaged. So, if the guard is there to protect access to a moving part, and at a minimum, that guard should be fixed and in place in a manner that you would at least need a tool to remove it. And again, we're minimum standard, so a bolted on sheet of steel that prevents access, that's a guard, right? A photo sensor that shuts down the equipment immediately, that can be a guard as well, but it has to be installed properly, PSR and all that fun stuff. But that would be leaning towards best method as opposed to minimum standard. So a machine guarding assessment would be beneficial. So looking at all of your equipment, make sure they have a lockout tag out in place in the event that guards have to be removed for maintenance and repairs. And ensuring that any safeguard does not interfere with machine operation as it might be overridden, and investigating best solutions to allow for operation and safety. So in other words, you want a guard to protect the worker, but you don't want the guard to create an additional hazard. And again, a link available there, looking at lockout procedures for farming operations. Some additional resources have been provided, material handling, struck by objects, caught between or crushed by objects for the farming sector, transportation equipment and vehicle safety, manual material handling, preventing slips and falls in the workplace, health and safety for small business, again, temporary help agencies and host employers, and licensing for temporary help agencies and recruiters. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. I will stop sharing. And we can either go to questions now or hand it back to Sean and or Kristen.
I will welcome if there are questions that have come to mind among the group within the chat. Please do begin to note those questions. I will share a few more details related to the focus sections of the campaign and resources or tips from WSPS that may prompt some further questions, and we'll catch up with those once we complete this section. Thanks so much, Ron. Great insight for the group. So several of these points will reinforce the statements that Ron has shared and the insights in particular. There may be a few additional relating to some of the resources and in particular tips within WSPS. So on the focus section of farm equipment, lifting devices, and mobile equipment, once more ensuring effective and reasonable inspection and maintenance programs are in place that capture all of the items within your farm equipment fleet and inventory. Often items may be left out of this program and off of this schedule, such as the wheels upon elevating work platforms, scissor carts, or even manual carts and pallet jacks that we may use within the workplace. Do ensure that the manual as well as powered equipment are captured within your preventative maintenance program and schedule. Rollover protective structures or ROPS and seat belts. Generally, powered equipment manufactured after a specific date, tractors manufactured after the early 1990s do require ROPS and seatbelts in place. And truly one is no good without the other. Do ensure equipment that has ROPS in place also has the seatbelt, both in good condition and are being used as required on the equipment. And if we do not have a ROPS or it is collapsed or removed for some reasonable purpose, to not use the seatbelt in that situation then. Generally, that need for ROPS and seatbelts will be where there is no overhead hazard or potential for contact with a low ceiling of a barn, for example. perhaps under branches of trees within an orchard, where actually the contact of those items with the ROPS may upset the stability of the equipment. But generally other places, and especially when on slopes and roads, as well as when traveling at higher speeds, even on our own properties, these are one of the main methods of protection for our operators to remain in a safe place if there is an upset to the stability of the equipment. Do ensure that decals, even the warning decals related to pinch points on equipment as reminders, lights, reflectors, including the plastic as well as tape methods of reflectors, and slow-moving vehicle signs are clean, unobstructed, visible for those around the equipment. Truly, our lights and SMV signs are what inform others of our presence, and also in some instances how slow we may be moving our equipment, especially when on roads. For your pre-use inspections, your circle checks, and the checklists that may be valuable tools, do ensure that they are relevant for the equipment that you have at your workplace. A general template is a great start. Be sure then that it does fit each of the forklift trucks or other mobile equipment such as tractors or telehandlers that you have on your workplace site. Do consider how modifications of equipment may influence or affect negatively the safe operation of the equipment. When we add to or remove from the manufactured state of the equipment, there may be some compromise and even risk associated. Do make those considerations. And to extend that point related to manufactured or fabricated components of equipment that are completed on your workplace site, do ensure that there is equivalent protection as it would have been manufactured off of your site. On the point of training, that item competent that was raised a few moments ago comes up for our lifting devices, but all of our equipment and processes truly. Do ensure that operators have the information they need before they need to use it for operation of equipment, including our lifting devices and mobile equipment in the workplace. And the one extra point I'll add here, especially related to the picture that we have on the slide, is the appropriate PPE when we are using equipment. If we are working at a height on an elevating work platform or a scissor cart, as an example, do consider what fall protection is effective and reasonable in those situations. And similarly, hearing protection if there is noise related to the equipment, high visibility garments or clothing for the operator and others who are working in proximity or on the equipment, considering what personal protective equipment aligns with your safe equipment operation. Related to equipment in the workplace, specifically on guarding, blocking, and lockout, to reinforce the points Ron has made, to inspect regularly these safety devices. Ensure not only at installation and when something does break down, we take that opportunity to investigate, but throughout the use of the equipment as well, which certainly is captured in part through those pre-use inspection process, but even through your health and safety representative, joint health and safety committee, or supervisor and leader of the area inspections day to day as the equipment is being used, and especially at heights of your seasons. Ensure that the guarding and lockout requirements as intended by the manufacturer or supplier have been met, and carrying that point forward again if there have been any modifications, if we have fabricated, added, or removed any items, do consider that flow to impact on the safe use of the equipment. Of course, there will be some instances such as maintenance. We need to grease or replace a part that we do need to remove safety devices such as guarding and shielding. When we are in that situation, that is where we control the hazardous energy, blocking, locking, and usually communicating by tagging the situation on that piece of equipment. And of course, once that repair is complete, the grease is on, the belt is on, we return that equipment to its safe state with any of the devices such as guarding and shielding. Also consider some of the exposure of our equipment and the function of our safety devices. Equipment that is operating outdoors, in dirty areas, picking up mud, perhaps even snow, depending if you're at the North Pole or not today. Do check in on those points throughout our use as well. It does not take a lot of mud and stones to be picked up by that power takeoff shaft to stop that shield from spinning freely. So give that a look over under safe conditions throughout the use, as well as during your pre-use inspection. Automation, robotics, other emerging technologies are definitely becoming more common within farming and agriculture. And if I suggest in our greenhouses, from the planting through to harvesting and processing, there may be more machines than in some of our more typical industrial workplaces, if you will. Although we may not have the same prescription or practices set out within legislation for our farming workplaces, the expectation would be similar. Ron made comment on a pre-start health and safety review, or PSR, which essentially is a rigorous inspection to be sure that equipment with safety devices and otherwise have been installed effectively. We see a lot of this with our emerging technology within the sector. There are sensors and lights associated with stop and go of the equipment. We want to make sure that those have been installed effectively. Our distances for the equipment to stop once we break that light curtain is appropriate for our use. So although there may not be the prescription for the PSR, guarding, shielding, etc., the reasonable precaution certainly does apply for our farm equipment, from the equipment design itself, installation, as well as when we are performing maintenance and that need for blocking, locking, and communicating the situation. Confined spaces, another focus section for the ministry, and in particular related to some of the incidents that have occurred within the sector over the last while. Once more, there may not be prescription for this hazard, but there is certainly risk and the need for reasonable precaution. Spaces such as your pump houses, spreader tanks, bins, and silos are likely to be considered confined or restricted, or spaces that have some risk associated, especially if we are to enter into these spaces. Do consider a program with policies and procedures, as well as plans for these spaces that would include from the identification to entry, the rescue if that became necessary, and of course any equipment specific requirements, including control of hazardous energy, as well as the atmosphere while we are within the space. For those who do have responsibility and task to work in proximity, and even more specifically within any of our confined spaces or hazardous atmospheres, ensure that training is complete and regular, as well as specific to those spaces on your workplace site. For your workplace site, do consider the design, layout, and organization of the structures, as well as the movement of equipment, people, perhaps even livestock that are on your workplace site. This is where we can capture some of the risk associated with people versus mobile equipment and that potential for pedestrian and machine interaction that often results in struck by type of incidents. Consider where there may be blind corners or unclear entrances and exits on properties. Do our best to ensure that people as well as equipment are visible when they do move on our property, which again may return to personal protective equipment as well as devices such as lights and reflectors, and even perhaps the schedule, the day or time of day that we are creating those movement and interactions. More light is often better. Too much light can become a bit of a risk, but too little light can become a bit of a risk in these spaces as well. Consider the dust that may occur within barns, such as in the picture on the slide we have here, when we are tossing feed into pens. That dust that has been created may have some impact on how visible the people as well as the equipment may be within the space. Consider, therefore, a pedestrian traffic safety assessment. Where do we have people and equipment that move and may interact with one another? Identification of those spaces where we have risks, and consider the controls that will be effective to reduce that potential, ideally eliminate that likelihood of a struck-by incident. Throughout our tasks in the workplace, no doubt there will be material handling both by equipment as well as by people. And manual material handling does continue to be one of the reasons for our higher likelihood of sprains and strains or musculoskeletal disorders within all sectors, including the agriculture sector. Do consider safe lifting and manual material handling training for individuals within your workplace. Depending on the load that we are going to move, the basic bend the knees and keep your feet side by side may work really well. Or in some instances, we may need to make some adjustments where one foot in front of the other or on either side of the object. Or my goodness, if it is a lamb that we have needed to pick up and carry and it is moving back at us, how do we manage some of those material handling tasks without risk to the lamb or the people who may be handling the livestock, as well as the items that we would expect to move a little less, such as a tote of grapes, as we see in the picture on the slide. On this point as well, to reinforce the statement Ron made related to ladders. Ladders are captured within a few of the sections of focus, from equipment and ensuring the ladder condition is good and maintained, the removal of any that are not in good condition from use, appropriate ladders for the tasks. That three-legged orchard ladder by name is generally most appropriate in those environments. The orchard, perhaps some other uneven surfaces that we are working upon. Whether it is a fiberglass and non-conductive ladder, or it is an aluminum, an extension, or an A-frame or step ladder, do consider the appropriate type for the task to be performed. And wherever possible, the use of the ladder to move people from one level to another, less about moving material, although we do acknowledge it does occur. Either way, we want to maintain that 3 points of contact with the ladder. So if that box that we are taking from one level to another requires both hands, consider an alternative, like the forklift truck or a second set of hands to pass the box up to us, rather than losing that 3 points of contact. Do consider risk assessments, not only where we are using equipment such as ladders and moving from level to level, but any of our manual material handling. Very simple tools and resources available to complete your own, as well as support by specialized consultants in ergonomics, for some of those more in-depth physical demands descriptions or assessments with analysis. From material handling, of course, we consider storage systems where we are moving the material from and to. Now, whether it is a stack of bins or totes in an outdoor setting, or it is racking with pallets upon the racking, do include these structures and systems within regular inspection as well. Increase the frequency of those inspections for storage structures and systems that are exposed to the elements, generally those that are outdoors, but also those that might be in cold storage areas or have exposure to high levels of humidity or moisture. We would expect those systems to sustain damage or degrade a little sooner than those that might be within perfect control of the climate. Be sure that the workers in the workplace are aware of capacities of the equipment that will move the material, as well as the structures that we will move that material from and to. That will include the condition of our pallets, bins, and totes as well. Ensure that they will hold the load that we are going to place upon or within it, and then definitely those shelves or racks that we are going to place the container upon. Just a couple of other notes to consider related to heat stress. In addition to the comment Ron shared about a heat stress prevention and response program with policies and procedures, do encourage workers to look out for one another. More often it is our coworker who will notice that we may be suffering from those signs of heat stress, whether through a red face, or maybe our character has changed just a little bit. Where we are able to provide rest from the exposure to the heat and the sun. Cool shade areas, ideal if we have some opportunity for rest within an air-conditioned space where we can even take a load off and have a sit down. But do be mindful as well as those extreme differences in temperature may become a risk. Where possible, scheduling those heavier tasks to be performed, especially outdoors during the earlier and later or cooler parts of the day, and encourage workers to use appropriate or suitable protective clothing. The fabric of the clothing can improve or not our resilience to heat. We also do want to consider, though, the clothing that we do wear, that it is not too loose and airy when we are working around equipment, which might become another risk then. Within the internal responsibility system or IRS section of focus, these are many of the basics, if I may, of your posting requirements. The Green Book is current. There is a health and safety as well as a workplace violence and harassment prevention policy. We have effective communication and training, which will attend to any of the language as well as literacy requirements of individuals within our workplace, which often occurs through a coach or mentor, even translator, material as well as people to support that communication. And of course, for those operations that require, based on number and or commodity or subsector, a health and safety representative that represents workers, or a joint health and safety committee with members to represent both the employer or management and workers, and ensuring that their functions are fulfilled as required, from inspections, investigations, through to meetings and recommendations. And occupational health and safety awareness and training, simply to mention not only those who are our permanent employees, but also those who are our temporary and even contractors on our workplace sites. Do ensure that every individual with exposure at the workplace is familiar and has the information needed related to hazards as well as controls. And do validate the awareness training requirements for individuals on your workplace sites as well. Now, the next few points on resources will be shared with you in follow-up email from Safety Connection Administration to highlight some of those resources as we move toward the question section of the session. The Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development, as well as the Ministry of Agriculture, has many valuable resources on the topics of health and safety in particular, as well as support for temporary foreign agricultural workers. Some of those highlighted include the Guide to the Occupational Health and Safety Act for farming operations, which summarizes the requirements of the legislation. A guide for health and safety committees and representatives, again, noting the number of workers as well as those commodities or subsectors that prompt these requirements. Health and safety and farming operations include some of the resources Ron had mentioned, such as lockout. There are a couple of handfuls of topics from tractors to slips, trips, and falls that have been developed as guidelines by the ministry. So you might expect then those would be reasonable precautions and perhaps what the inspector would consider during their inspection or visit at your workplace. Supervisor health and safety awareness and worker health and safety awareness also mentioned previous, and the resources available on the ontario.ca website to support that training. WSPS has a variety of resources and solutions from consulting to training, as well as some of the web-based resources that I will highlight for you through both our Agriculture and Horticulture Safety Center, which is accessible through the QR code, as well as the link, and our Small Business Center, acknowledging that so much of the sector are small business farming operations. This is the Agriculture and Horticulture Safety Center page. Through it, you will find resources based on number of workers, as well as those that might not be workplaces, such as family farms, and those that might be specific workplaces, such as greenhouse operations and others. In particular, you will find some checklists, tools that you could use to evaluate your current situation. There is an employer due diligence checklist, which attends to some of those basics in general and across sectors. And then in particular for agriculture and farming operations, based on number of workers, the small business checklists guide you to the minimum requirements, as well as some better practices to consider, from policy templates to links to resources such as awareness training as examples. One of our latest, and I may suggest greatest resources, is the Farm Safety Almanac. This resource is a collection of a handful of hazard topics that include tips such as controls, as well as templates such as checklists related to each of these topics. Once more, from tractors to slips, trips, and falls, some of the more common exposures within the sector have been considered within this resource. It is an electronic resource that we encourage you to download, pull out pages, perhaps even in print, that serve you well out in the workplace, such as the pre-use inspection for your equipment. I mentioned our Small Business Center, which is a separate web page from the Agriculture and Horticulture Safety Center, but a valuable resource for this sector nonetheless. Through the Small Business Center, you will find a health and safety handbook generator, a tool that guides you with questions and in the end provides you with a document in electronic form that you can download and print for your use as a handbook. Some of those basics, such as the health and safety policy, through to specifics, such as hazards like ladders, are included, and the opportunity for you to insert information that you already have and is working very well for you, such as your health and safety policy statement. Another of our latest, and I will suggest greatest as well, there's a few of these, is our workplace violence risk assessment tool. This is a tool available through our website in electronic format that will guide you through the requirements to complete this violence risk assessment, which by legislation is applicable to our sector and regardless of number of workers. It is rather new, and I will encourage you, as you do use any questions as well as comments to share, please do share that information back with us. And for any of the resources, of course, we are here to help and guide you through. Just a few last to share with you, including our free health and safety assessments. Essentially, these are conversations and perhaps even visits that we welcome to have between our account managers and consultants with you to discuss the current state of health and safety within your workplace and identification of opportunities for improvement with resources and solutions to fulfill those gaps where they may be relevant. Currently, we do have free e-courses as well, carrying us through the summer to fall at this point. Topics such as tractor safety and ladder safety are within the catalog of e-courses. And finally, although not truly a WSPS resource, it is available through order on our website, is the Green Book itself. The 2026 Occupational Health and Safety Act and consolidated regulations. If yours is aged or has gone missing, please do reach out. We're happy to provide you with a current. I hate to say in some way it doesn't ever get smaller, but it does have all of the requirements necessary to share within your workplace. And finally, I will mention that especially related to the campaign and focus on the sector, but in general, WSPS does provide free support, consulting and otherwise, for workplaces that receive orders from the Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. Within the report from the ministry, there will likely be some suggestion to make contact with WSPS for this reason and otherwise, but please do know, orders or otherwise, we are available and happy to help. With that, I thank you, and I will return the presentation to Sean.
Okay, thank you, Kristen and Ron. If I could have Ron come back on. I know we have some questions, one in the chat, and again, that's the best way to ask them is please enter them in the chat. But we do have one question from Bert, and ultimately it is asking if you know of any training, more in-depth training theory and practical for larger equipment such as tractors for farming and agriculture beyond the 1 hour free course. And probably Kristen would be the best bet there, or what others do.
Absolutely. I am happy to begin the response, and Sean, I will welcome you to support the response as well. I agree. There is an opportunity to provide further information related to agriculture equipment and making that comparison to forklift trucks, many providers that do provide that training. And without going back to the introduction question, for those who do represent our dealerships and suppliers, those are often the resources that I suggest to consider, as well as those internally at your workplace that are competent operators. Now, that said, there may be some themes within whether the 1 hour e-course as well as other mobile equipment and material handling equipment training that may be valuable to prepare that internal program for your use. So to summarize those thoughts, essentially, do use what specific tools such as the 1 hour e-course is available for you. And we are happy to help you build upon that a specific program that will consider the equipment and purpose of that equipment at your workplace. WSPS does have, in addition to the e-course, a relatively short still, but a 2-hour awareness session on farm equipment and tractor safety, and one with a few extra details to the 2 hours that consider operation on the road. We are happy to personalize the content to support your need, with perhaps my transition to Sean on this point for a moment, the note that generally WSPS does not facilitate the practical component of training. We would want to ensure the practical is specific to the equipment at your site. But Sean, I will welcome you. Any other thoughts?
Oh, I think that sort of sums up my thoughts pretty well. And how's anyone else do any tips and tricks at your locations that you found to be successful? And while you think of that, again, please keep the questions coming. I have a question for Ron. What questions might a ministry inspector ask a farm or worker representative while on site doing a visit?
So we're always looking at supporting the internal responsibility system, make sure that everyone, knows their rights as a worker, and so some of the the key things, there's situational things, but so I'll cover it sort of on the admin side and then the situational. So on the admin side is have they heard of the Act and its regulations? Are they aware of their rights under the Act and its regulations? If you saw something unsafe, what would you do, right? Are you required to wear safety equipment? If so, what safety equipment, what training have you received? Carry use and limitation, and is it appropriate in that circumstance for what they're using? Do they know who to talk to if they have a health and safety concern? Or do they know, in particular in farming and agriculture, and with the insecurity of labor in that area, with folks being brought in from other countries to work, do they know that they have the same rights as any other worker in the province? Right? Some folks, countries where they came from, a government official isn't necessarily your friend, right? So there's apprehension there. So it's just ensuring that they know their rights and the duties in the workplace, and that they understand how to protect themselves and where to get information if they have questions regarding health and safety. So those are sort of the general ones that typically, as an inspector in the field, I would be asking.
Okay, thank you, Ron. And just another one where I know I always have a little bit of confusion on, but for both of you, could you explain how the Act and regulations apply to the farming and agriculture industry? I know it's fairly straightforward on the industrial side, but there also are potentially industrial workplaces on a farm or agriculture location. So I know Kristen's talked about this before, but I'll leave it to the two of you to answer.
I can start off just with, the farm regulation has the specified categories, what applies. You need to look at where the industrial reg can come into play, right? So So basically, there's the Act, which kind of is the higher level one, and then you've got specific regulations to address sector-specific hazards. So, as I mentioned before with 25.2H, if compliance with a particular regulation that is applicable doesn't fully address a hazard, then you can use 25.2H to address it. Or if a reg does not apply and a hazard exists to a worker, 25.2H can be used to address something specific. So where the industrial reg might come into a farming and agricultural type scenario is, so farming is like, maintaining the fields, planting, harvesting, packaging. But if you have a part of your operation where you're converting that for sale, so maybe you're harvesting strawberries and you've got a section of your facility that makes jam out of those strawberries. That piece of the operation, the industrial reg would apply because now you're converting for sale. But if you're planting, harvesting, packaging, that would be all farming. So even if the industrial reg doesn't apply, it can still be used as a resource to try and help identify potential hazards in your workplace. So for example, if you just went by the Act and everything that's in the Act, it's pretty broad and general, right? So you might think, well, okay, I get it, like 25.2H, I have to do everything reasonable circumstance, but what does that really mean in my day-to-day operation, right? So even if the industrial reg doesn't apply, you could take a look through the industrial reg because you're going to find a lot of equipment type hazard type things there that would probably be in existence in that farming operation. Even if the industrial reg doesn't apply, it may help you identify hazards because even if the industrial reg doesn't apply, if there was a hazard of that nature, it would be addressed by 25.2H. So we still need to address a hazard. Whether the Act or the reg applies just determines where that order is going to be written as far as the contravention goes. If there's a hazard to the worker, as I say to inspectors, and I started as an inspector with the ministry, is, don't look for contraventions as an inspector. Look for hazards and then address it with an order, which, a contravention. So you're first looking if there's any hazards to the workers, and then what are the efforts to mitigate those hazards, and are they appropriate in circumstance to the minimum standard? I'll pass back over to Kristen.
I do not want to upset the the statements you have made. Those are perfect. And the only point to reinforce truly is even without prescription, general duty and that responsibility to take every precaution reasonable will prevail, essentially. So that might help in some way for the next question that I see that has popped up in the chat. So I'll share some more thoughts on that if it goes that way.
It is going that way. I was going to combine that with another one I have, but is WMIS Reg 860 applicable? But we have a question of workers handling chemicals need WMIS, correct? And when spraying, how do you determine the PPE other than the safety dash sheet? It can be hard to establish exposure levels. So pass that to Kristen.
I'm happy to start it and then welcome both of your thoughts. So if it is a farming operation, so again, growing, raising, harvesting, packaging those animal and plant commodities, Regulation 860 for the Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System, or WMIS, is not prescribed. That does not mean that hazardous material information is not reasonable. And there is even an employer responsibility related to acquainting workers with the hazards of biological, chemical, and physical agents. So it's an awful way to say, yes, in some way WMIS is applicable. You're likely going to do the WMIS training and establish the WMIS program because that's familiar language that we use. The why we must do it is not as explicit as Regulation 860 for WMIS is prescribed. My answers are always tangled, but in the end, to summarize that, and then I'll toss to Ron and even Sean, workers handling chemicals require adequate information to handle chemicals safely, which may be through WHMIS information. And when spraying, depending on our product, there may be other legislation that is relevant as well, such as the Pesticide Act. And either way, Occupational Health and Safety Act, Pesticide Act, WHMIS or not, definitely use your safety data sheet and the information found within that SDS for not only your personal protective equipment, but other precautions to consider, ventilation, as well as emergency response requirements. So follow that same theme of WHMIS, even if an order couldn't be written, ultimately. Ron, your thoughts?
Yeah, so from an inspection standpoint, you know, as I said before, where a specific regulation either doesn't apply or even with applying in the circumstances, there's still a hazard to the worker. So in this case, when a specific doesn't apply, you still got 25-2H, right? Every precaution, reasonable circumstance, you still have to protect your workers. And even on the WHMIS argument, like our legislation is lined up for specific sectors, specific hazards, you know, so you know, there's a lot more chemicals in the manufacturing side of things, so it makes sense the way the legislation is lined up. But at the end of the day, you got to protect your workers, right? We all have to protect our workers so they go home safe at the end of the day and have long, successful careers as members of the workforce. So even on the WHMIS argument, there's, you know, the, of course, exemption under WHMIS for consumer commodities, right? Something that you buy off the store at your, you know, Canadian Tire or what have you. Even those are consumer commodities. Anything that you're requiring your workers to use, you need to make sure that they're doing it safely. So you can always get a safety data sheet, even for consumer commodities. You just call the manufacturer, go to the store, and they'll have it for you. And you got to make sure you're meeting all those requirements at a minimum. You've also, you know, for the air, you know, if the SDS doesn't cover the aeration of it, of that particular product or a mixture thereof, you know, then you need to contact the manufacturer. If contacting the manufacturer doesn't answer that, then you may have to get someone in to take a look at what you're doing, an industrial hygienist perhaps, to take a look at what you're doing and how you're doing it to ensure that you have the appropriate measures in place to protect the workers. So, you know, the WHMIS is you know, it's for where it applies, it's a very good specific thing. But it can also be used as a good guide as what you might reasonably do in a circumstance where the WHMIS doesn't apply, but you still want to ensure that you are protecting your workers and doing everything reasonable in the circumstance.
Okay, thank you. It really does come back down to 25-2H. We keep getting back to it. Does that answer your question? And any other questions? Sort of last call? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Kristen and Ron, for an informative safety connection. If you do have any other questions that come in, please reach out to either WSPS or the MLITSD. Thank you for your time, and I hope everyone has a great Thursday morning, almost afternoon now. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a safe day.
Thanks so much. Take care.